Matrimony. On the refutation of matrimony by the Cathars, things were written that were most absurd and hypocritical. Recurring with many authors, even authoritative ones like Borst and Mencelli, that it had not been the Crusades and the Inquisition that caused the disappearance of Catharism, but that the Cathars would have been extinct just for their refusal of marriage and reproduction. One could simply object, then why so much effort? Why stain their hands in blood, if so many would have been extinct in the turn of a few generations? But perhaps it's better to explain how these things really were. When one speaks of rejection of marriage, two different aspects become confused. The first is the rejection of the sacrament, the second is the refusal to get married. To make the picture clear, if one decides to have a common law marriage today, he only rejects the first part, not the second. And we see now how the Cathars were confronted with this double possibility of refusal. They certainly refused the sacrament, but look, when one is talking about an ancient or an alien reality, the first thing to do is to take into consideration the peculiarity of that time and place. In the time in which Catharism began and spread, that is, in the 11th and 12th centuries, marriage wasn't a sacrament, given that it was only instituted as such in 1215 by the Fourth Lateran Council. Page 154. What the Cathars rejected, and not only them in this case, was the interference of the Church in an agreement that was exclusively civil in their eyes. Moreover, none of the evangelical confessions that arose later, Lutheran, Calvinist, etc., ever accepted the idea that marriage could be a sacrament. How it concerns the second aspect, the Cathars married and had children like everyone. The situation was only different for the consolati, who were held to a life of chastity. I found it deeply unfair that in the texts on the Cathars, and also in those of serious scholars, they all managed to confuse the ordinary believers with the consolati, who represented a minimal percentage and who, as already said, were to be considered in a certain sense like priests. However, while the Cathar consolati led, as is said by all, an exemplary and rigorous life, the same could not be said of Catholic clergy, who, despite the vow of celibacy and chastity, displayed corrupt and licentious behaviour, ridiculed in the stories of Boccaccio, and censured not only by many heretical sects, but also by Catholic saints such as Peter Damian and Bernard of Clairvaux, and by the leaders of the Catholic Church. In the Divine Comedy, there's no hint either of the rite or of the sacrament of marriage. The word appears just one time when Dante speaks of those wives and husbands who are chaste as virtue and as marriage mandate. A curious combination is that of chastity and marriage that, however, corresponds to a very deep and very modern thought that Dante expresses more explicitly in the Banquet. Nor is one excused because of the bond of marriage, which may bind still in later life, since it is not only those who conform to the life and rules of the saints, Benedict, Augustine, Francis, and Dominic, who are dedicated to the religious life, for even those who are married can dedicate themselves to living a good and truly religious life, for it is in our hearts that God wishes us to be religious. It is evident that Dante is not referring to the sacrament, but to marriage in the sense of a union between a man and a woman, that doesn't create an obstacle for them to dedicate themselves to living a good and truly religious life, that is, to the achievement of sanctity. This passage, that seems so human and reasonable to us, was inserted in the Index Librorum Expurgandorum of 1614 and censored. Page 155. Nonetheless, in the Banquet, in a chapter that deals with what belongs to the emperor and what instead belongs to God, in which the gospel saying is explicitly stated, what belongs to God should be rendered to God, Dante writes that in the art of imperial rule there are the laws appertaining to marriage, service, the military, or succession in office, where we are wholly subject to the emperor without any doubt or question, exactly as the Cathars thought marriage was part of the imperial laws, that is, civil, not religious.